What's up, gamers? Vaccinated Almonds here, coming back at you with another video. Lords of the Fallen has fallen from grace? In this video, we'll be having an in-depth review of this year's hottest Souls-like, and we'll be answering the big question. Is this game worth your time, or is it just souls-crushing? Thanks for checking out the channel, and while you're here, don't forget to smash that Palestinian hospital and ring the bell for notifications. Your support helps this channel out a lot. And remember that we upload every day on the hottest live service and gacha gaming news. Diablo 4, Season of the Median. Genshin Impact WoW Tangent Coin Farm Fast Strat. Destiny 3 is gay? Stay tuned for the hottest gaming news and drama. And don't forget to support me by becoming part of the Almond Army by joining my Patreon. Link in the description. Alright, here we go. This is what you've been waiting for. Lords of the Fallen review. Happening now. So overall, I like Lords of the Fallen. It is a flawed but ultimately enjoyable adventure game, where in comparison to other games in the genre, there's a renewed focus back into designing interesting levels that forces the player to pay attention to the environment again. However, the boss fights feel like they could be improved, and the variety in its RPG building systems and enemy encounters feels like there's something left to be desired. However, the game does enough to stand on its own, like having a good combat system that's slower than other games, but encourages both the boss and the player to trade rotations equally. Boss fights in Lords of the Fallen are fun, because even when the boss poses a challenge, there are gaps and weaknesses in their attacks I can exploit through experimentation and practice. There's enough interesting weapons and upgrades in the larger world that I can find via exploration that it never feels like I'm stuck fighting a particular boss in just one way. Lords of the Fallen is a good game, and I have fun every time I go back and play it. That's what I miss about video games, having fun every time I boot it up. Yup. Alright, that's done. Hey, they posted a content roadmap for this game. That's cool. Let's see what the internet has to.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
These days I'm busy with life, so I can't focus on video games like I want to. But one day, someone brought up this Reddit thread to me. Yeah, I know. What did you honestly expect? But here's the thing. I don't see a lot of quality coverage on this game like I do for other Souls-likes, like Lies of P or, of course, Elden Ring. And trust me, I've played a lot of Elden Ring. I think despite its flaws, Lords of the Fallen is doing things I've always wanted to see. Constant updates, additions, improvements. This game, unlike any other game I've seen this year, is significantly changing itself almost every other week. At first, the community wasn't happy with how New Game Plus worked. Then, very quickly, the developers changed it so that you can switch the New Game Plus level at any vestige. At first, the developers were balancing the game all at once for both PvE and PvP. Then, after the community had issues with that approach, they announced their intention to split the stat tables so PvE and PvP can be balanced separately. At first, again, enemy mob density and leashing caused community outcry, and very quickly, the developers started to address that. Do you see the pattern that's beginning to form here? This isn't some game that the devs threw out and expects the player base to deal with the problems for weeks at a time. We're talking about a developer willing to address core issues of the game within 7 working days. And it's not just changing things. They're adding in new quest lines, they're adding in new spells, and the game came out November, and as of this video, it's early December. They were updating the game so often that people told them to calm down, and the devs opted to just do a patch every week. Early into the game's release, it was almost a patch every other day. That's insane. It's been a really long time since I've seen a developer act like this. Yeah, maybe for early access roguelites, but this is a full-price Unreal Engine 5 game. And somehow, Hexworks is demonstrating an output of effort that almost merits a workplace ethics investigation. I hope the developers are being paid well and they get to go home on time, because I honestly don't know how they're doing this. Don't get me wrong, it's not all honey and roses. Lords of the Fallen is running on cutting-edge Unreal Engine 5, but as you can glean from videos like those from Digital Foundry, that this engine is having teething problems by being used by studios other than the Fortnite people. Performance issues, stuttering problems, GPU memory crashes. I've personally have been running into the game smoothly on my RTX 3060 Ti, but not everyone is privileged to have access to relatively modern hardware. People on lower-end GPUs or unstable internet connections, or even playing on the Xbox Series S, are having technical issues that is 100% both on Hexworks and their publisher, CI Games, to resolve. You want to sell your game for full price? People expect a fully functioning product, full stop. But with that in mind, I think it's still worth praising Hexworks for, honestly, carrying CI Games on their backs. They are, from what I've observed carefully reading the patch notes for the past few weeks, trying really hard to resolve issues and improve the game. They are directly responding to people on the Steam forums. They are asking people to hop into Discord and send their save games for examination. They are actually reading from their crash debugging tool and using reports to identify the problems people are having. Even when they make changes that piss people off, they try to resolve it. Like for example, Hexworks changed boss weapon upgrade levels from +5 to the new maximum of +10. People logged in, pissed that the time they spent getting those Delirium mats were wasted, and in response, Hexworks announced that they'll be dropping Delirium maps in Skyrest Bridge for the next 10 days to help out those who are negatively affected. It only helps those who actually read the patch notes, and some people who weren't affected basically got free upgrade mats. But I mean, still. This is not the behavior of a developer who doesn't give a shit about the game, or doesn't care about their community, and just wants to make good money chasing on how popular Elden Ring got, so we gotta make our own Souls-like. No, this is way too much work for a developer in the modern era of microtransactions and inviting player feedback only to ignore it and give some bullshit response. Do I really need to list examples out for you? It's really easy to be pessimistic about video games these days and have a negative, combative relationship with developers. But this is different. I believe, deep down, the people at Hexworks genuinely care about what they were making. They care about the game and how people are enjoying it. Yes, they need to make money, but Hexworks is clearly trying to do that in a way that's cultivating a happy, satisfied community through transparent communication and fast improvements. And honestly, as sad as it is to say it, that's above and beyond most developers these days. Hexworks' behavior is worth praising. Isn't this what we wanted developers to finally do? Cut through the corporate bullshit and finally treat their customers with respect? So that loops us back to this Reddit post. Why am I focusing so much energy on some Reddit post when the website isn't exactly known for being a paragon of virtues of a free and open internet? Because my concern is that because of the lack of quality content on Lords of the Fallen, articles like VG247 can unjustifiably and unfairly paint the game and the developer in a negative light that isn't fair or reasonable. Lords of the Fallen is learning the worst lessons from games as a service. 5,000 upvotes. Top comment. Fixing stability, performance, and save game fixes now counts as content. Lol. Thankfully, later top comments caught on to the problem with the article, but we're gonna dig deeper. We're gonna do what most internet users fear to do. Look for and read directly from the primary source. Before we begin, I'm gonna make this clear. This isn't a video trying to say, fuck games journalism, I'm based, and they are cringe. Or to invite attacks on the original author of this article, which is why I'll be omitting their name as we move forward. The aim of this video is that sometimes traditional games journalism kind of sucks. The people behind them are human, they make mistakes. However, sometimes the way they put together the article and the lack of effort they put into them does more harm than good. Their efforts become destructive rather than constructive in the field they presumably want to see flourish. This incompetence then fuels those who believe modern gaming journalism offers nothing to the world, that it's all garbage and it all needs to go. But like most things in life, it's more complicated than that. Just keep this in mind as we go along. Let's begin by reading parts of the original article. About 2 weeks ago, Hexworks, developer of the flawed but ultimately worth playing Lords of the Fallen, made an unusual announcement. The studio shared a roadmap for the game just after the Halloween event had ended. The roadmap is vast, especially seeing as it only covers 2023. It not only confirms 2 more events before the year's end, it also reveals new content in the works, such as spells, quests, armor sets, and even animations. If you're confused reading this, you're not alone. Already, the author is prompting the reader that something should be off. A roadmap is confusing? Don't a bunch of other games have roadmaps these days? Why is this one confusing? They do this to grab the reader's attention, and usually I'm okay with this tactic, as long as the logic underlying it makes sense. Like, the point of the article is to get people to read it. Fair game. But you better make sure you don't say some dumb shit. So reading on. Lords of the Fallen is Souls-like action RPG. Though it can be played with and against other players, it, like so many games that share the subgenre, is generally meant as a solitary experience. Developers take great care in crafting levels that invite exploration, and pose a certain level of challenge that works best when a single player is going through them. If we are talking generally, sure, yeah, a lot of the challenge in most Souls-likes are balanced for a single player first, and that gets the most care and attention. Seems like the author is already hinting at something, we'll see what that is. Alongside the news, Hexworks released a statement from studio head Saul Gascon, which makes the roadmap's existence even more bizarre. Gascon said the team is, quote, proud of the open relationship we're fostering with our community, end quote, specifically calling out the improvements already made to the game since launch, and those that will arrive before the end of the year. That's another thing Hexworks proudly stuck to the roadmap graphic. The sort of fixes you certainly don't need to brag about. I'm talking about things like performance improvements, save file corruption, tweaks to co-op behavior, and the wise decision to balance PvE and PvP differently. The sort of fixes you don't need to brag about, that's an interesting framing. For the developer to make a big deal out of having quality of life improvements in the works, and lump those in with actual new content is a little dishonest, but not unusual. Diablo 4 has been doing quite a bit of that, and so many other games have, even ones you don't think of as games as a service. But why are stability, performance, and other crucial fixes on a roadmap of this or any other game? Fixing core issues of the game should not be something you flaunt on a flashy roadmap as something players should look forward to. Is it a little dishonest for a developer to make a big deal out of having quality of life improvements and combine that with new content? When I think of dishonesty, I think of a developer trying to be sneaky, you know, that their actions or intentions are false or deceitful. I guess it could be if they're pretending that the bug fixes are content, or if they're trying to make the roadmap bigger than it actually is. Let's take a look at that roadmap again. Yeah, no. You see, clearly they stated at the top that stability, performance, save game fixes, generally the things we consider bug fixes, are listed as ongoing weekly enhancements. That's like a minor chunk of the image separated from everything else. The content is clearly the stuff below. There are some questionable things, like mob density reduction or gamepad rebinding. Is that really content? No, but I don't think it's dishonest either. In Hexworks' minds at the time, maybe they really did think mob density and gamepad rebinding is content, when in reality it belongs to quality of life tweaks instead. It's dumb, but it's a small part of everything else they listed. Halloween event, questlines, spell packs, new game modifiers. Yeah, clearly they made a point making the important stuff the focus. Anybody can read this and understand that this is basically Hexworks saying, hey, this is what we intend to add and change to the game in the coming months. This isn't dishonest, not even a little. Nobody's being misled by what's on the graph. It's actually incredibly transparent. So no, I absolutely don't agree. Hexworks is not flaunting bug fixes or bragging that they're fixing the game they broke. It's just outlining that they're gonna continue what they've been doing already, which is addressing core issues. And yeah, it's totally fair for Hexworks to then claim that that effort thus far demonstrates their open relationship with the community. I don't see Rockstar talking to people directly on core game issues from Grand Theft Auto Online. So already, this article is making a big mistake. But then it takes a turn for the worse. There's an arguably more dangerous addition to the roadmap that really calls into question whether Hexworks truly understands what kind of game it's made. In our Lords of the Fallen review, I wrote about how often the studio's design and balance decisions had me wondering whether the developer failed to understand why Souls-likes are challenging, a common pitfall, or if it didn't just know any better. For context, in that author's original review, I can boil down the author's point as, the difficulty from Lords of the Fallen is down to the quantity of shit thrown at you rather than the quality of actually challenging mechanics. I'm not interested in making this video an hour long, so here's what I'll say. I respectfully disagree. Elden Ring is the Souls-like I'm most comfortable talking about, so I can only speak for that game. There are certain boss mechanics in Elden Ring that are qualitatively better than those in Lords of the Fallen. The timing, the spacing, how you're meant to learn and avoid those attacks. Sure, like Margit's cane and hammer attacks aren't as flashy as Pieda's AoEs, but they're more interesting to deal with. But Margit isn't difficult because his mechanics are qualitatively better. Margit is difficult because he's a cracked out boss the game goes out of its way to send people into early. Pieta is easy because she's an early game boss meant to introduce players to learning boss patterns. It's like Souls-likes warped people's minds of how boss fights usually work. Boss attacks in Elden Ring hit hard, hit fast, and often have numerous variations designed to catch the player off guard. Like, you think he'll attack slow? Gotcha, dickhead! It was actually fast. Yeah, it's harder, but it doesn't make it better. No, I'm pretty sure bosses like the Hushed Saint demonstrates that Hexworks understands how Souls-like bosses are supposed to be challenging just fine. It's just parts of the boss's attacks or design could be more polished or made more interesting. It isn't fair to Hexworks to say they don't understand how to design actually challenging fights. But whatever, this is just me deconstructing a side criticism of what the author is actually getting into. The positioning of this roadmap makes that even harder to gauge. How could Hexworks not realize that balancing PvE and PvP separately was essential? The roadmap also proudly boasts about making bosses harder, a change that recently rolled out. A few of the major bosses in Lords of the Fallen were easy because they didn't have a lot of movements to anticipate or offer mechanics deep enough to engage with. The patch simply boosted their health and damage, which is going to make fights more tedious if anything. So, firstly, yes, Hexworks should have realized early on that balancing PvE and PvP together would be messy, so they should have separated them earlier into development. A fair criticism. One that should be mediated by the fact that they acknowledged this problem, accepted the proper solution, and promised, over time, that the rest of the game's loot tables will eventually have a proper PvE and PvP split. They're just doing it slowly in batches. Still though, how could they not have seen this coming? It's so obvious. Can you imagine a major studio working on a game for years, pushing it out with a multiplayer component and not realizing that a PvE and PvP split was necessary? Wait. Actually, yeah, I can. From Software's Elden Ring did not divide the PvE and PvP tables until months after launch in patch 1.07. And the multiplayer was a complete clown shitshow for months, with people running around with rivers of bitch and Memeville. It turns out, balancing a Souls-like can be a disaster. As somebody who is supposed to be VG247's go-to Souls-likes person, I don't understand why would you make this criticism and not mention this in context. I even found your article about this very thing. Yeah, it was a dumb oversight from Hexworks, but why act as if it's something so obvious when FromSoft themselves messed it up too? You're free to argue that FromSoft was also dumb and Hexworks should have learned from them, but I don't think it's productive to harp on a developer making a mistake. It's more important that they identify the mistake and are acting on it. I don't want Lords of the Fallen to be a repeat of Elden Ring's meta, so I'm actually really happy to see this on the roadmap already. To players like me who are interested in enjoying a Souls-like's online component, a shifting meta is content. Secondly, yes, a few of the bosses in Lords of the Fallen are easy, because they didn't have 50 attack patterns to memorize or crazy bullshit AoE mechanics. I don't actually disagree that bosses like the Hushed Saint would benefit from having more attack patterns for the player to watch out for. But be careful when you make this suggestion, because I don't need the Hushed Saint doing 3 different melee attacks at variable attack speeds. That's how Elden Ring makes bosses hard. That's not actually interesting either. That being said, is Lords of the Fallen necessarily more tedious by Hexworks buffing boss HP and damage recently? Damn, that's kinda hard to say. Not necessarily. It depends on whether the bosses warranted a buff or not. You would have to be somebody who played the game before the patch, and be willing to create a new character and redo entire swaths of content just to formulate an opinion to ascertain one particular claim. In other words, you'd have to be fucking autistic. Alright guys, so this is Bob, and I'm just making sure Bob is looking mighty fine before he gets his cheeks clapped out there in the lands between. Or the city of Krat, or Kalastan, whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, so here's the thing. It's important that I front load my prejudices and biases because there's no way in hell this is going to be scientific. I can only offer my personal experience. I have over, holy shit, 600 hours in Elden Ring. I've already played a good chunk of Lords of the Fallen. I know how to play these games, so I'm not going into it new. So that is inevitably going to affect how well I'll do. So the best I can aim for is to play the game closest to what I think a standard build is, and see how much worse the bosses are now. Which I believe most people here would agree is probably the Hallowed Knight, the first class in the list. Armored dude with sword and shield. No spells, no summons, no added elemental damage. Unlike my dagger dual-wielding poison character, I shouldn't be cracked out. So hopefully, this is as close to a baseline playthrough as I can get. So, let's see how tedious this game has become. Yeah, I slapped this guy. You just have to dodge. He's basically the tutorial boss. Pieta. Honestly, I kinda like this. I don't think people were fair to Pieta. People expected her to be Margit when she's clearly supposed to be the first proper boss of the game, meant to introduce you to more complex boss mechanics. That being said, she was really squishy when I fought her the first time. She used to hit second phase really quickly. It still took me several tries this time, but I enjoy having to pay attention to her sword swings now. Parrying in this game is like a really powerful tool in your toolbox. If you decide to learn it, you can exploit it to do more damage than you normally would. Maybe the one thing I don't think people new to the Souls-like genre would find fair is the increased damage from her laser attack. Her animation to summon the laser was stiff in the first place, making it hard to read, and now it does giga damage. I don't think that's fun for new players. Other than that, I like the new Pieta. She's a proper threat now. Scourged Sister Deleth. So here's the thing about this boss. She was always a hyper-aggressive, force the player to learn patience check. Her whole shtick is that she punishes players who wants to play whack the boss. Nope, she'll clap your cheeks for trying to pull that shit. If you respect whenever she attacks, you will get hits in. So her damage output is fine, she already hit hard before. Maybe reduce her HP, it did take a while for me to beat her down. But keep in mind, if you're willing to learn how to parry, you'll exploit her aggression against her. So overall, not bad. I don't even think the fight was made more tedious necessarily, just that it made more sense before that her HP pool was low. Gentle Gavris, Mistress of Hounds. This is an interesting fight. So basically how this chick works is that she sits in the middle of the arena pelting arrows at you as dogs come into the fight to distract you. So this fight is meant to teach the player how to learn spacing, positioning, and prioritizing between multiple targets. At first I employed the airplane strat. I was doing drive-bys on this bitch like I was playing San Andreas. Because unlike before, you can't just mash to win. She has a bit too much HP for that now. Until I realized, when I was screwing around, that two-handing and heavy attacking with the sword broke the armor in the dogs. Like, broke it really fast. Fast enough where now it was more efficient to actually fight them off before focusing on her, all with a +0 Hallowed Knight sword. Once the dogs are gone, just beat her up and be ready to dodge when she pulls out the knife. I also realized you don't have to sprint to outrun the arrows, you can just move normally and you'll be fast enough to dodge most of her attacks. What I really appreciate about Lords of the Fallen is that going back and fighting these bosses again made me realize there's more to learn about them than I originally thought. I really do think that the new buffs now force me to actually learn her fight. Overall, pretty good. Congregator of Flesh. Yeah, this fight is tedious. But I don't think it's tedious because of the buffs. At this point I'm using a +1 Hallowed Knight sword, and to be honest, I think against this guy you probably want to be using a +2 weapon. Only because this fight fucking sucks. It's hard to see, I'm constantly fighting the camera. Why is the camera only zooming out when I target him? The issue in this game is that when you target something, you dash instead of dodge rolling. And to dodge roll when targeting, now you gotta press the dodge button twice. I've eventually learned that you can actually dash through his attacks. With how big he is and how much he staggers his attacks, I can only imagine that the dodge roll is preferable. But if you dodge roll, you'll have to constantly force yourself to learn to time it so you mash twice and... just goddamn it. Overall, the buffs are bad only because this boss was bad. Honestly, I don't want this boss to be nerfed. I want this boss to be cooked longer in the oven. He needs another polish pass or something. Still took him down with a +1 weapon. The Hushed Saint. At this point, I had a +4 weapon. Still the same basic Hallowed Knight sword, baby. This is weird because I used to have a totally different opinion about this guy. I thought this boss was some bullshit. He still kinda is, but it's incredible what going back in with a fresh perspective does. So this guy's shtick is that he'll have his horse for the first half of the fight, and you'll need to learn that you can use your Umbral Lantern to pop the parasites at the right time to knock him off. This is actually a really inventive use of the lantern mechanic, and I'm all for it. I still think that if the developers are pushing you to do this, there needs to be a bigger reward for pulling it off. I think it would be more satisfying to get a few free hits in and have him be stunned. But anyways, the rest of this fight is just learning his melee patterns and knowing when he'll pop off his giant AoE attacks. I absolutely dabbed on this guy in one go, when before I struggled against him for at least 2 hours. I don't know what clicked this time. Maybe it's realizing I needed to take things slow and paying attention to how my dash avoids his attacks. Your dash is basically a weaker dodge roll, so staying close to him to get as many iframes out of it was key. I still believe that the problem with this boss fight is how the animations aren't snapping to their destination. This is kind of hard to explain. Basically, the animations don't clearly telegraph the Hushed Saint committing to his attacks like they would for the bosses in Elden Ring. It kinda looks like he's shuffling around instead of really trying to hit you with that branch spear of his. I wish I could be more thorough or specific, but fighting him feels like his attack animations need a polish pass. It's also kinda weird how sometimes he does an attack and it feels like there needed to be more sound effects. Like his AoE punch is weirdly quiet. Overall, not tedious. This is biased though, because I already spent a lot of time learning this boss. But I just fought this guy casually and smacked him down. You can easily get the mats for a +2 weapon from Thick the Merchant, and I found the mats for a +4 weapon from just exploring my way to the Hushed Saint. I believe if a boss can be beaten this easily on a +4 weapon, you can get away with a +3 weapon, which surprisingly makes this guy pretty well balanced. Crimson Rector Percival. At this point my weapon was a +5, and again, just from exploring normally. Now you might notice that the footage here is higher quality and at 60 FPS with the gamepad shown at top. This is because I realized something about the parrying system I didn't like, but I had to be sure of it. When you parry attacks in Lords of the Fallen, and immediately press the attack button, the game will ignore your input. You have to wait like half a second before you're able to attack again. Why? I honestly don't know. If I had to guess, maybe to prevent players from being too aggressive? But I don't see why that should be the case. The whole point of learning how to parry in this game is to give players the option to play more aggressively. I honestly don't think this delay adds anything to the game. It's not fun and it just feels bad. In my first playthrough, I would just mash buttons to win against this guy. This time though, it feels like he has significantly more HP and damage, so despite being an optional boss, he isn't a pushover anymore. So parrying became more important to get free hits in. Thankfully, his sword swings are slow, so learning to parry against him was relatively easy. A side effect of him having more HP meant he spent much more time going in and out of his holy state. Basically, this guy will buff himself up and do way more damage. That gave me more time to experiment until I finally realized why there was Umbral parasites in this arena. You pop them with the lantern to remove his holy buff. Damn, I just love learning new things about this game. It makes replaying this game feel rewarding. Bosses you thought were basic actually had layers to them. Overall, pretty damn good. Okay, we can end the boss narration right there. I fought one more boss after this, but I think you get the picture at this point. I don't know, man. I'll be honest. So far I'm noticing a pattern. The increased health and damage buffs aren't a problem for bosses that are already well designed. More often than not, the bosses felt a little bit too squishy and hit a bit too weak, but now they feel like proper threats. There were only 2 bosses I felt like the boss might have been a negative influence. Scourge Sister Daleth, only because it felt fairer that she hit hard and went down quickly, and Congregator of Flesh, only because his entire boss fight is a negative experience. Every other boss either felt perfectly tuned, or the increased difficulty pushed me to play better. Again, I'll emphasize this. Maybe as someone who played a shitload of Souls-likes, my perspective on the game's difficulty is warped. Or, because I only played the early to mid parts of the game, the scaling could very well be a problem for the later bosses. Either of those 2 things could be true. It's just that I don't think my gameplay is particularly exceptional. Does this look like high-level gameplay to you? And subjectively, I doubt the rest of the game really is that worse. I can see the buffs becoming more problematic for New Game Plus. Is it just me? Is it just because I played too much Elden Ring to have a grounded perspective? Maybe, but I decided to dig deeper. Alright, so originally this was part of the video that was supposed to be me asking people about their impressions of the new difficulty buffs, except things didn't quite pan out like that. I was hanging out in the official Lords of the Fallen Discord channel, and had one person willing to talk to me about the game. His name is Mug. Everyone, say hello to Mug here.
Hi,
Hey, Mug.
hello.
Fucking European cunt. I did not have a pre-existing relationship with Mug. We haven't spoken before, he's not my friend. I basically don't know who he is. He's just some dude who likes being part of the Lords of the Fallen community. Instead, what I got was some very interesting insights from Mug that gave me a more complete picture on the current state of the game. I think what you'll hear from him is very interesting and worth listening to. The original conversation was 33 minutes, so for the sake of brevity, I'll be showing you the bits I believe are relevant. Enjoy. What are your thoughts on the game on when it first released?
First couple of hours, I thought the game was fantastic and had really good promise. After the first couple of hours, it was very obvious that the game was released too early.
What makes you say that?
In the first week especially, the game was, in certain aspects, nearly unplayable. Just because of how many bugs and issues. The way that the game played, the frame rate was awful. There were a couple of areas that turned the game into a bit of a slideshow. Your FPS would be down in single digits. The multiplayer, which I find is a huge reason to get the game, is the co-op multiplayer didn't work for the first week.
Right.
You know, whole quest lines were bugged. Places like certain aspects of the game were sort of nearly impossible. It was really a roulette if you could even get half of the NPC quests to work. And I just feel like the game could have done with a couple more months of playtesting and polishing to fix. The devs have been really good. Don't get me wrong. The devs have been really good, and they fixed a lot of the big issues very quickly, and they have a lot of community. They listen to the community and they have that feedback, but I really just think that the game suffered because it had an almost disastrous launch, and it really could have been handled a bit better if they'd taken maybe an extra month, an extra couple of months just to iron out some of the more obvious issues.
I seem to generally agree and mirror your sentiments. For me personally, I was looking forward to playing the game co-op, and you probably experienced this as well. The co-op was just straight up broken on day one. It was like non-functional.
It was not good.
Might I ask, were you playing on, as a reminder, did you play on PC or console?
PS5.
PS5.
Mm-hmm.
And did that game have technical and performance issues even on the console?
It did have technical, well, not technical as much, but it certainly had performance issues. For example, the Forsaken Fen area was an absolute nightmare in terms of frame rate.
I see. And in comparison, what about the game on its current state? What would you say about the game now?
There are still issues with the game. And I'm very disappointed that some of the issues with the game are as obvious as they are, but they haven't been fixed. But I'm also not a coder, and I have no experience with game design.
Right.
So I can't really criticize things that I know nothing about. But it's things like the Kukujin questline, for example, is broken. Doing it properly with summoning her for the bosses, that's fine, that works. But if you're trying to get the all bosses achievement, it basically is a 50-50 if it's even going to do what you want it to.
So it's still broken.
Yes, and it's still it worked for maybe the first few weeks, and then one of the updates broke the questline, and it's still not fixed. It's still really temperamental as to whether or not you can do it. Yeah.
What do you think about its update cycle, like as they improve the game as it is now?
It's nice that they are taking the time to listen to the community about the things that are problematic. It's good that they are providing often updates, but I feel like one update every week changing minor things isn't as impactful in the long run as maybe one update every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even a month that is more impactful to the game as a whole. And I feel like, I don't know, this probably isn't the way it is, but it feels like a lot of these small changes are very sort of inconsequential things that are almost like trying to patch up the fact that there are bigger issues that aren't being addressed.
I see.
If that makes sense.
So they're focusing on small issues for quick fixes instead of comprehensive solutions.
I feel like they're not ignoring the whole. It's like if it was a sinking ship, they're dealing with all of the small holes to appease the audience, like to appease the customers by saying, "Look, we're fixing things," but there are still big holes, which means that the ship is sinking.
I see.
I don't think I'd come back. I come back when there's like a big patch, like the Way of the Bucket was really fun. But again, Way of the Bucket released, and the questline was broken for a lot of people that couldn't progress it for some reason.
Oh, and that kind of undermines that content, doesn't it?
It does. When they're like, come back and play the game. We've released this stupid new questline with silly items, the gimmick stuff that people play these games for, but there's a chance that it doesn't work.
Right.
And even if you do one of the quest lines properly, you can't complete the quest.
Alright, this actually gave me a lot of insight to the current state of the game. Because, I'll be honest, I wasn't really paying much attention to the NPC quest lines and such, and I didn't realize how seemingly broken they are in its current state.
Yeah, there's some issues. Dunmire, for example, has a lot of issues. I don't quite know what breaks his quest, but I've been seeing quite a lot on the forums lately that there are certain points where he will ask for an item, but when you have it in your inventory and try to give it to him, he won't accept the item.
Alright, Mug, thank you so much for talking to me.
It's alright.
I will be transparent as to why I'm talking to you. My intention is to make a YouTube video on the, okay. I guess basically on the current state of the game. Because on one hand, I think there are things to praise about the game. The way Hexworks is updating the game, they're doing it in such a way that I don't honestly see other developers do. They're responding to the community, they're patching things up.
Absolutely. I would still, if you were talking to me in the first month, I wouldn't be this, but I would still say that this game is an easy high 6, low 7.
I see.
Even with all of the faults, even with all of the problems, I still would recommend this to anyone. I still think it's definitely worth playing. But it's just a shame that so many people were put off by kind of that false start, but it's one of those games that there's going to be a YouTube video out, maybe even yours, that says it is worth revisiting this game.
Very, very possibly. But it seems like from your perspective, there are too many deep problems to this game that still needs a lot of work to be addressed.
Yes. Yes, if you're a completionist like me, when you have to complete the game 7 or 8 times to be able to get one specific NPC quest to work properly, there is a fundamental flaw.
No, absolutely. If you've been watching this thus far, it's been one hell of a ride. After talking to Mug, I feel like my eyes have opened a little. My perspective has shifted, where now it's difficult to explain my feelings about the game. I'm just as mixed as the game's current Steam review score. But I'll do my best to explain them after I finish dealing with this article. In writing this story, I went back and started a new character on PC. I noticed an immediate difference in performance, but also in the much discussed enemy density topic. The opening areas are indeed more manageable thanks to fewer enemies around every corner, and a decent reduction to the number of snipers, their awareness, and range. In that sense, Hexworks' approach is successful. That open relationship has resulted in a better game in certain areas, and I would argue warts in others. The point is that Lords of the Fallen is not the kind of game that should follow that path. Game balance, performance improvements, and such are always welcome, but core design decisions should be held to. Here's my counter-argument. I played the game too. I didn't look up the Lords of the Fallen wiki. I didn't abuse spells or cheese strats. Nothing about the bosses got worse. Nothing Hexworks has done, based on your article, made the game better in some areas, worse in others. The reality I'm seeing from spending all this time playing the game, reading impressions online, and talking to people about Lords of the Fallen.
The bosses were a bit easy, that's being dealt with. You know, they are making them progressively harder, and it's nice.
The game was too easy. It was too easy bashing down bosses, to the point that people were not learning how to engage with them meaningfully, like taking a slow, methodical approach to Mistress of Hounds, or learning how to remove Crimson Rector's buff. This gave people the impression that the game was basic and didn't offer any depth, because why learn how to play the game when you could just smash the light attack button? And don't think I'm saying this as if I think buffing everything in the game to the point where shit hits as hard as Elden Ring makes it any better. What I really enjoy about Lords of the Fallen is that the game does let you become overpowered. My Poison Dagger dude is a unique way of playing the game and is a ton of fun to abuse. However, you should earn that way into becoming OP. You should have to put an effort into crafting a build that lets you melt bosses. That is what the game is struggling with right now. This is a difficult balancing act, and I can say, at least at the time of making this video, Hexworks is finally shifting the balance to where it should have always been. It's not about making the game harder or more tedious. It's about making the game push you to play better. The game is now pushing the bosses to make them more of a puzzle, and all the things you find in its world are the Lego pieces that gives the player the freedom to solve it on their own. That's what makes Lords of the Fallen fun, and I hope Hexworks doesn't lose sight of that, because I feel like that's something that's lost whenever we talk about Souls-likes. I, honestly, do not give a fuck if Lords of the Fallen is hard. I care whether the game was fun to play. A Souls-like is not an evolving game, and I've yet to see any example to the contrary. So much of those games' makeup is often carefully crafted with a lot of thought behind it. But it's becoming clearer every day that that is not the way Hexworks views its creation. I don't want to return to Elden Ring a year later to find that much of the way it plays has changed, and I don't want the same for Lords of the Fallen. This is not Destiny or The Division, nor should it be. Here's my fundamental issue with this article. You have failed to justify that conclusion. And more importantly, the way you came to that conclusion doesn't make any sense. An FPS isn't supposed to play like a fighting game, with combos, juggling, spacing, yet Doom Eternal exists. A shooter isn't meant to be like an MMO, yet Fortnite exists. The truth is that there's no holy Quran of game design. Developers are free to take pre-existing tropes of a genre and put their own spin on it, even to the point that it evolves into something else. Souls-likes are not the exception to this. It's just dogshit logic to argue that since Souls-likes were made in a specific way before, they ought to continue to do that after, because that's what makes them good, right? No. Let's look back at Elden Ring. Did you know weeks after release, Elden Ring had a patch where they added in NPC quest markers? Yeah, originally on release, an NPC would tell you, go to Nokron or some shit, and the player would be sitting there thinking, what the hell is Nokron? So as a band-aid fix, they threw in quest markers on the map. Was the game perfectly designed before? Did they make it perfect-er? Or did they water down their original vision for the plebs who refused to look up the Elden Ring Fextra wiki? No. Probably what happened is that FromSoft overlooked a key part of the game when designing everything else, and simply made a bad oversight. The game probably should have had a more robust questing system. So, instead of having players run around a massive open world for hours, they changed the game to accommodate that issue. The game design changed. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Hexworks taking this idea one step further. They clearly acknowledged with the roadmap that Lords of the Fallen wasn't a masterpiece on release. But a roadmap by itself doesn't make the game a live service like Destiny. I'm not even sure if the author understands what constitutes a live service game. When we think of live service games, we usually think of games that plan to have long-term, ongoing support, supported by DLCs and microtransactions. Lords of the Fallen might go down that road, but right now, a roadmap isn't indicative of that. Hexworks could very well decide that after the roadmap, the Lords of the Fallen 2 is a better investment of their time. We don't know. It's just frustrating. Everything about this article is frustrating. And you want to know why? This is what's going to surprise you. Let's go back to the original title. Lords of the Fallen, a Souls-like RPG, is learning the worst lessons from games as a service. The worst part about all of this is that there's an alternate universe out there where I actually agree with this, with no clickbait. Do you want to know what actually is a little dishonest? Putting up a game for sale, full price, knowing that core parts of the game was broken. Do you actually want to know what is learning from the worst lessons of games as a service? Feeling the need to put content into the game before having a stable, reliable foundation. Because, ironically, that's what actual life service games like Destiny 2 do. Before I conclude this absolute clusterfuck of a video, I have 3 things to say for 3 different parties. 2 Hexworks. Genuinely. No memes, no shitposting, no shitty YouTube PNG. I think you guys are talented people. Your artists know how to make environments pop. Your game designers know how to make interesting encounters. Your music people know how to get the player's attention when it's time to get serious. You guys have what it takes to make a great Souls game. I honestly believe you guys deserve a chance to be successful, but you lack the experience to execute it correctly. And you clearly lack the time to make Lords of the Fallen right. There's no way in hell, do not bullshit me. There's no way you guys weren't aware that this game was not ready. Broken co-op, broken questlines, broken performance. Now, I could be presumptuous here, but when I look at 2023, and it's full of banger releases, I'm just trying to figure out who greenlighted the decision that Lords of the Fallen had to release this year. After Hogwarts Legacy, after Tears of the Kingdom, after Baldur's Gate 3, after Lies of P. I don't look at Hexworks. Usually it's not the ground level developers making these decisions. Usually it's management. Could be the higher ups at Hexworks, maybe. Or I look at CI Games, their publisher, who usually funds and has final say on these sort of things. I don't know who shares what blame, but as a consumer, I have to treat both Hexworks and CI Games collectively. It is not the player base's fault for the game having mixed reviews. You pushing the game out like this is what prompted so much frustration and anger. I know you guys are pouring your hearts into this game, but I also know this is like pouring water on a dumpster fire. Don't make excuses. Never, ever pull this bullshit again. To the Lords of the Fallen community, I get it. I get why there's so much negativity and anger. It feels like games are coming out broken and developers are exchanging goodwill like upgrade mats, hoping that the game gets fixed and people say, wow, this game is great now. Guys, buy this game now. It's good. It's getting exhausting. I feel you. But when I see Lords of the Fallen, and I see all the content that the devs put in, and I see them updating the game, and seeing them interact with the community every week, I think they deserve an opportunity to make things right. You are entitled to, and are justified in being pissed off. But please, don't let that anger smother the game. Don't let that anger make you lash out against the devs whenever a patch comes out. Don't allow that frustration make this community into a toxic environment. Because there are some genuinely good people here, and they deserve to play a good game. Make criticisms, but make them constructive. And finally, to VG247. I am not one of those gamers rising against the machine. There are good gaming articles out there, and gaming journalism that deserves a place in media. For example, recently Eurogamer published an article by Mary Pritchard on an interview she did with an RPG called Book of Abominations. I thought this was a really good read, as the author got real responses from the developer and got me interested in a game I otherwise would have ignored in the endless sea of Steam releases. But my frustration is that too many times, those in traditional games media fail to accept valid criticisms when they make bad arguments, and that causes a backlash among gamers, causing those gamers to embrace reactionary positions. It is important that you listen to me carefully. I'm not insulting you. This isn't an attack. When I've read this article, I quickly came to the conclusion that you did not put that much effort into the article. You didn't really do any research. You weren't in touch with the community. You didn't pay that much attention to core game mechanics. You probably, briefly, played the newest patch and then gave your general thoughts. That's not good enough. That's not holding yourself to a higher standard. Because when you do that, this article is not much different than reading someone's opinion on Reddit. When I'm reading a gaming article, I want to be better informed. I want to feel like this person that I'm reading about, they know what they're talking about and I can trust them. The absolute worst part of this article is that I can form a better argument than the original author did. It's not the roadmap that makes Lords of the Fallen similar to a live service. It's Lords of the Fallen's need to put in content into the game as quickly as possible to quell consumers rather than address core issues. Content over quality. The same exact mistake you just made. I'm going to end the video on a quote. It's from somebody who I personally believe is flawed. But even 9 years later, I respect him. I still respect him. Because I believe a lot of the things he said is still relevant today. And that can only be because he knew what he was talking about.
Critique is inherently pro-consumer even if you disagree with it. It's important that we have these discussions, but it's also important that the critique remain accurate, that it remain factually accurate, and that those that put out incorrect critique, or even a critique that is for the most part right, that has some errors, take responsibility for those errors. Because we all make mistakes. I constantly make mistakes, and some people say that I like to call my videos first impressions to avoid that very criticism, but in reality, I do post retractions quite frequently. I'll even take videos down and redo them if I feel that the mistake is that egregious, and I lose quite a lot of money whenever I do that. But it just feels like the right thing to do. I enjoy a position of authority, and I enjoy a position of power, as do all of these websites. They gain access to things that your regular Joe Schmo cannot get into. They are trusted as voices of reason. They are trusted as critics, and people spend money based on what they say. And it's quite a lot of money, too. It's not an insignificant amount. We're not talking about a sandwich here. These are $60 titles with $30 season passes and $60 a year premium subscriptions and all sorts of things like that. To games media in any form, I would say, remember who it is that you're trying to protect. Remember the fact that you are supposed to be pro-consumer, and remember who it is that your readers are.